There's something each year that happens called the rut lockdown, and it's an interesting phase of the rut. There are a bunch of phases to rut, and the rut lockdown is actually full of opportunity, but can be full of disappointment and despair too. And I think it's confusing for people. To me, if you look at the way that the rut lays out and the phases of the rut that I like to teach and explain, to me it takes all the confusion and guesswork out of it. So when I go into the rut and when I go into deer season and we're anticipating the rut, then when you know those phases are coming and you know when they're coming, then it helps take the confusion out. But when you're taking the confusion out of the rut, you're taking the randomness, and you can be a lot more precise and defined in how you approach your hunting, and that equals success. You know, the rut is not just a 7 or 9 day rutcation. The rut, to me, that primary rut, is at least 3 weeks to 24, 25 days of very precise action of what's going on, and it begins and ends at the same time every year. And so we're in one of the phases right now. We're in the pre-rut, and you know, so I'll talk about the rut lockdown, talk about what it is in a second and why. But when does it occur? The rut lockdown, there's the pre-rut. And there's a long period of time of the pre-rut because it's a buildup. All of a sudden, there's a little bit of rutting activity. You see little bucks, rubs, scrapes popping up, and then it kind of dies down. And if you get a warm, hot day, it's windy, it'll die down really bad. It'll be really suppressed. And then all of a sudden, you get a cold day, and it jumps up. A bunch of activity, and it's ever increasing in activity. And if you don't have mature bucks lay down exponentially more sign than young bucks. And so what ends up happening is you don't have older bucks around. You're not going to see a lot of sign. You're going to think, well, it hasn't even started yet. You know, it must be starting late. It's hot and dry. It's starting late. I heard people this year say it was hot and dry, so it was going to start late. I heard other people say it was hot and dry, so it's going to start early. So it's just funny how people interpret things, and someone will throw something out there and people will run with it, but it happens the same time every year. You know, around here it's after the October 20th, somewhere around the 20th. Get a cold front, get a flurry, get a few days off. Then you get a flurry of more activity and more activity, you get more on your trail cameras. We have about 60 trail cameras out, cell cams between 2 states, and we get to see and watch when this activity takes place. And when it's happening in one state, it's happening in the other. When it's happening on one side of the property, it's happening in the other. You get to see that. We see that pre-rut, long period of time, the rut lockdown, the peak rut, and then the post-rut. And when you get that pattern, that's going to happen the same time every year. Starts and ends the same time. Our post-rut to us is around November 13th, 14th, 15th, it's really starting to slow down. And by the 20th, it's almost non-existent. I'm not saying there's not much going on, but there really is not a lot. There's not a lot of daylight activity. The camera's shut down. There's just not much going on. So imagine in the pre-rut, a lot of does are starting to come into estrus. We'll talk about how to hunt this phase too. But right now, it's all the same. That's the order. And then all of a sudden, as the pre-rut builds in intensity, slows down a little bit, builds even more, slows down, builds even more, it's like a stair step. Then all of a sudden, bam, there's a whole bunch of does coming into estrus. And when they come into estrus, every buck gets invited to the party. Doesn't matter if you're old, young. And it's interesting, they found that between old and young bucks, there's not really that much of a difference. They'll breed between 2 and 4 does in that primary rut period. Might be with the doe, in the case of an older buck, for 2 or 3 days, know that she's coming in tender, and then all of a sudden they breed her a little bit, and then they're on to the next one. Young bucks, I think, are more opportunistic. These older bucks are with does are over here. It's getting its butt kicked and pushed around, and all of a sudden here's a hot doe over here that's ready, that's been missed. It goes over there and breeds her. And that's just the way it works. I think young bucks are more opportunistic, and those older bucks are ready to go, and they hold them and they fight other bucks off. And so that first doe at the end of the pre-rut for all those bucks is pretty easy, because exponentially you get a couple trickling in, all of a sudden there's more and more, and then there's a whole bunch. Doesn't mean it's even peak, that there's a lot coming into breeding. It just means that that's the activity you're going to see in the woods, and it's building. So there's a whole bunch of does. Every buck gets invited to the party, and for that, scrapes all of a sudden all that sign that was in the pre-rut, rub, scrape, chasing, seems non-existent. Well, because a lot of bucks are on does. But think about it, if a lot of bucks are on does, and those are those first does coming in, this is going to take place for 2 to 3 days, 4 days at the most. The rut lockdown isn't a week long, because as soon as those bucks breed those does, they're off to another one. And if that's 2 or 3 days later, and it's all happening at once, that means you slow down for 2, 3 to 4 days, and then they're looking. Well, it's not going to be as easy. It's not like those bucks all come off one and then they go to their second one. And there's a lot more does than bucks. Let's just make, for the sake of argument, there's 3 does to every buck. Well, as soon as they come off, those does that were early, well, then it's still like some does are coming in, some does aren't ready yet, more are coming in. So the older buck might find a doe right away, he might not. Younger buck might get one because older bucks are on him. So it becomes a lot more random. That second doe is a little bit easier, or a little bit harder to find. That third doe is really hard, that fourth doe, and that's where you get into the post-rut. And so that would be the entire 3-week rut. So the rut lockdown happens when exponentially there's a lot more does coming into estrus. They're not going to exhibit chasing, sign, rubs, scrape, because they don't have to. They don't even have to fight much at that time. However, when they're looking for that second doe, third doe, that's the peak rut, and that's different. Then that's when it gets into around here. It'd be the 5th, 7th, 10th of November. That's that peak, the second. For you down in Kansas, maybe southern Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, that period of time of the peak rut, instead of being the 3rd of November, the 2nd of November, whatever it might be, through the 10th or 11th or 12th, for you it might be the 7th, the 8th, the 10th, through the 20th of November even. So you're just shifted back a little bit in some of those more southern areas. But when you get in the upper Midwest, those are those time frames that happen every single year. And if you don't have mature bucks, again, you're not going to see it. So imagine you don't have mature bucks in your area, you're not seeing pre-rut activity. You get into the rut lockdown, bucks are breeding probably somewhere else because they're not in your area. You're thinking you're getting into November 2nd, November 3rd, and you're thinking, boy, the rut hasn't even started yet. That's just because you didn't have older bucks in your area, coupled with the rut lockdown. So then all of a sudden you start seeing rut activity November 4th from bucks that are coming from distant areas, and you think, oh, the rut's starting now. No, it started 2 weeks earlier. It's just you're seeing it for the first time because you didn't have older bucks. And if you have a rut property only, you're going to see a flurry activity for just the peak rut, a little bit in the post-rut, maybe a week, and then you're done because they're going back home. They're going back to those areas where they call home for their fall actual range, maybe early winter. And that's why a rut property might be a 1-week property for years. So where if you're managing well, then it's a 2 to 3 month property. That's the rut lockdown. Every buck gets invited to the party. What does that mean for you? That means that when you get towards the end of the peak rut, or the pre-rut, and again, those time frames would be end of October, around here, southeast Minnesota, southwest Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York, northern Pennsylvania, New York, maybe even you could throw in northern Illinois, northern Indiana, northern Ohio, the Dakotas, even north half of Iowa. Those are going to be pretty similar to that time frame. And if you're south there, you can start adding days. And I believe that goes further north up towards Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire. Those might be similar days to southern Wisconsin, northern Indiana. And you start getting down further down the coast, or it'd be a little bit later, like Kansas or Tennessee. But bottom line is, what do you do? How do you hunt it? You know, all these bucks are on. For me, it's not that time to be hunting buck bedding areas at that time. I really want to hunt doe bedding areas, between doe bedding areas, getting between buck bedding areas, doe bedding areas, but especially that perfect X of bedding areas, whether they're doe or buck, and food. Those are the perfect X of movement where I could see deer going to food in the afternoon, coming from bedding areas in the morning to midday, going to bedding areas, from bedding areas in the afternoon, going towards food. Whatever their reason is, they're going back and forth, you're in that X of movement because you never know when a buck is going to come off a doe. Is it coming off a doe at night, and in the morning it's going back to a bedding area or a doe bedding area, its own bedding area to look? Is it coming off a doe in the middle of the day and so going straight to a food source in the afternoon? You really don't know. You can expect movement to slow down, but you rest assured it's going to happen, and it could happen at any time. So I want to be in that X of movement. I want to put myself in a spot where they could be coming, going. If you just go sit on a food source all day, bad. If you go sit on a bedding area all day, bad. I want to be in between, and that's how you hunt the rut lockdown. When you get into the peak rut, I'm focusing on morning bedding, afternoon food. When you get in the post-rut, I'm really focusing on that food source in the afternoon. So different strategies for each phase. And then the second rut, I'm going back to almost like peak rut / post-rut / rut lockdown. You want to be in that X of movement, but you don't want to forget about food sources, so important in December. You're just fast forwarding 28 days. But again, the rut lockdown, it's a real thing. It's when a high percentage of the does are coming into estrus. And when you get down in the southern states, you can throw it all out the window. You have to watch individual doe family groups. Even horse breeders can time when individual horses are coming into estrus, and they can time artificial insemination trips based on individual horses and when they come in to estrus on the year to the date. So in the south, on a certain island somewhere of cover that a certain doe family group is coming into estrus, then jot down those dates where you saw some really good breeding activity. Fast forward 365 days, mark that on your calendar, and that's when you go hunt that spot if you're looking for breeding activity. You get up here in the north half of the country, it's a little bit different. A lot different, actually. The further south you go, it gets just all random. Up here, let's face it, if a fawn's born 6 weeks early, 8 weeks early, it's born in ice and snow and it dies. If it's born 6 weeks, 2 months late, it's too small going into the winter and it dies. So the breeding gets very, very short the more intense the winter is. When you get down the south, there's no intensity, no winter loss. And there you go. Rut lockdown, you can plan it out each year. You can plan out to hunt it. And it can be a lot of fun. It's a great time to be in the woods. If you know it's a discouraging time, but it's just a few days long. That's a really good thing. You can count on it, learn how to hunt it, and have a great rut hunt this season. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. You're our best followers. You followed all the way to the end of the video. Really invite you to check out our website. We have our earthway spreaders for sale. Great Christmas presents. We're booking clients right now, all 5 of us. So by the end of December, it seems early, but by the end of December, our schedule will be booked for 2025. It's hard to believe. I'm already booked for December and most of January, February. We have our web classes, the Rut web class, how to design your whitetail property, and really important, hunting hills and thermals, understanding the wind. Those are great products on our site, all the books. Thank you so much for watching all the videos, buying the seed that you did this year. Really appreciate you.